Hi, the goal for today is to get the key verification sample to work in a Java application. We'll focus on the parameters they need to set to get this working, and also towards the end of the video we'll discuss the different library versions that are available. So let's start off and copy all the necessary namespaces. I already have a project opened. And then the main code. So that's done. So there are four things that need to change: the RSA Public Key, the access token, the product ID, and the license key string. There's also the machine code parameter, but we'll talk about it in the end of the video when we discuss the different library versions. So the RSA Public Key, you can find it by clicking on this link here and scrolling down. Make sure to copy the entire string, and then we'll replace it with the one that was in the sample. So then we have the RSA Public Key, and there is the access token. So the access token, it's also available on this page, but I'd like to show you the way you can create it yourself in the dashboard. So you can click on your username, access tokens, create a new access token, and then let's say give it the name test, and then we need to set the activate permission, and that's because we're calling the key.activate method. There's also the product lock that we can set later. So in production you would have the option to put a constraint on the type of products that access token will work with, but I will just set it to any. We copy the access token, and now that's done. So there are two more things: the product ID and the license key string. To get the product ID, we need to either have an existing product or create a new one. So I already have a few products over here, and the product ID is the parameter, the value that you can obtain here. I'll just show you how you can create a product. So if you don't have a product already, you need to click on create a new product. Let's call it something creative, test project 2. You can set, you don't have to change any of the parameters here. You can keep the defaults. Let's create the product ID. We need to replace it here, and then there is the license key. So to get the license key, you need to click on the create new key button, and then let's say we can keep the defaults, but maybe we can set feature 3 to true. Sounds good. We copy the key, and then we paste it here. So now we've replaced all of the parameters that we needed to replace to get this working, but there's one more thing that I'd like to mention, and that is the helpers IsOnRightMachine parameter. And by default, so while testing, I will remove this check just to show you how it works. So let's run it. Right, the license is valid. That's exactly what we wanted to get. And then let's say system.out print line. Let's also print out another parameter like the feature 3, because that's the one we set when we created the license. So we would be able to access it like this. So we would assume that if we go back, as you can see, the feature 3 parameter is set to true, so I would expect it to be true here as well. And that's correct, it's true. Remove the system print out like this. So that's so we're done, but then as I said, we removed this check for the correct machine, and the reason we did this is because to have this check, you have to ensure that your license is either that it has machine code locking enabled, and with that, if we go back to the product page and then scroll down to the maximum number of machines, as you can see, when it's set to 0, that means that any number of machines can activate. But the problem with that is that if you have this set to 0, it means that, so if we look at the type of device, so if we look at this list here, we see that even if we activated, the machine didn't register here. And that's because the max number of machines is set to 0. But once you set it to, let's say to 1, because we'll just, maybe 5, that's also correct. As long as it's greater than 0, it will work. And then if we go back and then run the sample, it takes some time to compile it. Everything works again as it worked before. But then if we go back to the product page and click on this button here, we can see that a new device has been added to this list. So if this is a common mistake, that if you would have, if I go back and remove this device here and then set maximum number of machines to 0 and save it, then this sample will not work because the device doesn't get registered, and then when we are about to verify if it has been registered, then that's going to fail. So this is going to say the license doesn't work. So that's something to keep in mind, is that if you get this error message, then you have two options: either to just remove this check if you don't want to check, if you don't want to enforce the number of concurrent devices that can use this specific license. But if you want, so for example, if you're using node locking or if you're using floating, then let's say you want to have 10 machines that can use it simultaneously. In that case, you can keep this check and it will work. So we've covered most of the important details. We checked, or we looked at the RSA Public Key, the access token. We created it ourselves in the dashboard. We found the way to find the product ID and also how to create the license key string that you need to set here. Let's now focus on the machine code method and then also the type of library version, or the different library versions that are available. So the defaults use the get machine code method, but then that's not mandatory. So you can have other ways of identifying end users. If you use get machine code as it is shown here, then it will register that particular device as an end user. But then, for example, maybe you're charging your clients per number of, or for example, if your application can run on multiple processes, then you can include the processor ID and then have that as an end user. So there are many ways of defining it, and you can set it to any value you want. And there are also different ways of commuting it. So for example, if you're just developing a Java desktop application, then the defaults will work in most of the time. But then if you're working with Android applications or other platforms, then you might need to change that. But we have that covered on the help pages, the different methods that are recommended for different platforms. But in most of the cases, you can keep the defaults. There are also the different library versions that you can find in the first part of the here. So there's the Cryptolens jar and Cryptolens Android.jar. And the only reason to use the Cryptolens jar is that it has additional methods to compute the machine code, but Cryptolens Android.jar has all the same methods, and the only difference is that it doesn't have one version of the machine code method that depends on a specific library. So if you want to keep the number of dependencies low, then I would suggest to use the Cryptolens Android jar. It's not that it doesn't, or that it only works on Android. No, that's not the case. It's just that it's the minimalistic version of the SDK, which has all the methods but then lacks some methods to compute the machine code. But then again, the recommendation is to use the machine code method that we used today. So get machine code, and then you provide the version 2 parameter. And that method is available in the Cryptolens Android.jar library. So that's a bit about the different library versions. So just to recap, we covered that there are 4 parameters you need to change: the RSA public key, the access token, the product ID, and the license key string. We talked about the machine code parameter and that there are different ways of defining it. You can either keep the defaults, which will work on most of the platforms, but then you can also change it to something else. Or it all depends on how you like to define end users of your application. In some cases, for example, if your application runs in Azure Active Directory, then you can use that identifier instead. So you're linking the end user to that Active Directory user. And finally, we also discussed the different versions of the library. There are 2 of them: Cryptolens.jar and Cryptolens Android.jar. And we, as a summary, that the Cryptolens Android.jar is the one that has, in fact, doesn't have, or it has very few dependencies. At least it doesn't have one problematic dependency that can be a problem on different platforms. If you want to keep the number of dependencies low, I would suggest use the Cryptolens Android.jar package. And the difference there is that the Cryptolens Android.jar doesn't have some older versions to compute machine code. But if you don't need them because you're starting from scratch, then I would just suggest to go with the Cryptolens.android.jar method. The package. So that was everything I wanted to cover in this tutorial. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.